Hey, TikTok. You're not TikTok. You're YouTube. Do you see how bad I've gotten at this already? Hi, YouTube. I'm just hitting the camera and rolling and see what happens because honestly, like I haven't done a lot of prep as far as videos each week. Like that was the routine I wanted to get into. But I got kind of caught up with a writing deadline this week and things kind of got away from me. So I thought I would just sort of see what comes out and see what happens. I'm thinking a lot right now about stuff, like magical stuff and stuff in general. And I'm thinking about it for a couple of reasons. First, I am dealing with stuff left over after the death of my father. So like, in all of our conversations about like death and dying, there really isn't a whole lot said about what to do with things after the fact. And that has proven to be like this overwhelming thing. And I'm not looking for advice, okay? Like, please spare me. Like, there's a lot going on. I've had advice. It's fine. We've got plans and whatever. But that's just a thing. And then the second thing is a friend of mine in another coven has had one of their elders die recently as well. And they are sort of going through all of the stuff that person left behind. And so like there's the question of lineage and belonging and tradition, both like as like talking about an individual family like me and my family versus talking about a coven situation within a tradition. And in both cases you have like physical things and what do they mean and what do you do with them and who gets them. And I've thought about stuff like this before just because I think you have to, like when you get older, and then also like in my tradition, so I'm a Gardnerian and we have what are called downlines where when my working partner and I bring people in, we initiate them, we train them in our tradition, and then if they so choose, they can hive off and they can go form their own coven. And that's called your downline. So basically everybody who it's like an MLM for Western esotericism. No, I'm kidding. So I'm kidding. Pretend I didn't say that. Anyway, so I have people who can trace like their magical connections back to the coven that I run. And that makes you think about what you are leaving them with, not just in terms of like spirituality and training and knowledge and power and whatever, but also just like the objects. And I've seen this too in other groups where a coven leader will retire and then the question is like, okay, well, what do I do with the ritual tools? And most of the time they go to somebody else in the coven, maybe who's starting a coven, or sometimes they're split up amongst members of the coven. Sometimes if that coven leader has their own like adult children, they'll pass them to them. But objects, man, like... And I have a lot of stuff, and obviously all of this has gotten me thinking more about what happens to it. Where does it go? I think we put a lot of stock value in the things that we own. There's a big emphasis in witchcraft spaces, even when we don't mean to. There's a big emphasis in witchcraft spaces on the stuff that we buy and the stuff that we make, the stuff that we have, the stuff that we consume. And we like our tools, like we like stuff, even while I think lots of folks are out there saying, and this is very true, you don't need stuff to practice witchcraft. Like it's not about how fancy your stuff is or how much of it you have. But even so, we tend to acquire stuff. And what I've learned over the course of years of practice is that the stuff that actually matters will change. Like the tools that were really, really significant to me in one phase of my practice might become less significant to me as my practice develops for one reason or another. And I think too, like if we hold animist perspectives, which a lot of us do, then I think that our tools, they're more like our friends, or they're like spirits who we work with in our magical spaces. And just like friends, like human friends, like just like other object friends. You have your lives go in different directions. Sometimes you might outgrow each other. You might find that you belong somewhere else. And I've really kind of cultivated this attitude in the last couple of years of being conscious of the relationships that I have with my tools and allowing them, encouraging them to pass on and go somewhere else when it's time. Meanwhile, there are some tools that I think I have really deep bonds with that continue to be a significant piece of my like material practice. So for example, I have this dish, this like blue glass candy dish that I use for water. It holds water on my altar. And I have had that thing since I got it at like an army thrift store on base when I was a teenager for like 50 cents. I started using that thing because it's transparent blue, it's really pretty, and it made me think of water. And I wanted it for my altar as a kid, and I paid for it with my like couch change, you know what I'm talking about? And I still use that thing, and I'm 38. And I know that I would be really distressed, like if I were to break it. Like this is one of the objects that I was really just precious about when I was moving, and every time I've moved. And that thing, it cost me nothing. It's not special in any sense of what we would normally think of as a special or sacred object, but it has become that way because I feel like I have a relationship with this thing. It's seen me through a lot. It's a kind of a steady presence in my ritual work. And something like that, you know, like that's not the object that, like, if somebody was gonna like invade my magical room, that's not the object that would catch anyone's eye. They might look to like the broom leaning against the wall, or the bookcase, or like the sword or whatever. And all of that stuff is great. And I have relationships with my swords too. But it's different. Like nobody would look at the humble blue thrift store candy dish. So even the tools that I would necessarily pass on to like a downline, I don't know. Like, I don't know if they would have the same weight or significance to that person. Like, maybe that's not the right person who gets them just because they're downline from you. Some tools, and the sword is a good example, are different because they have traditional like group associations in addition to like my individual relationship with them. So for example, a coven sword that's potentially handled by other people in the group or by leadership in the group, maybe it's passed down, becomes significant to everybody there. And a tool like that, like it fundamentally has a different sort of relationship. So it's just funny to think about objects and what we do with them and the different nature of objects. I think this is one of the reasons too why kind of as a community, we all have a really sort of strange, conflicted relationship with like the Book of Shadows or the Grimoire or the Magical Journal. I actually do a whole workshop in this. If you're coming to Mystic South, like this is a workshop I do, and I'm going to do it there again, with like why it is that we tell ourselves and we tell each other, you have to keep a magic book, you have to keep a magic book. And overwhelmingly, so many of us are just bad at it. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. But one of the things that I think is significant is that we don't have a great sense of what the magic book is for and who it is for. And there's a narrative that circulates in our community about how like, well, the Grimoire / Book of Shadows, I'm kind of using them interchangeably here. I understand like there's some slight differences based on your tradition and who you are, but for the sake of argument, let's pretend we're talking about just like magical books as a whole. There's this idea that you're passing it down to like subsequent generations of witches / magicians. This is a text that this is like your wisdom or your experiences or your feelings or your magical whatever, your magical works collected so that somebody else can do them. When the reality is that that scenario is super rare. I think it's probably more common now as there are more practitioners and it's more of like a publicly acceptable thing to do. But like having scored a few like books of shadows off of places like eBay and at flea markets at like pagan events or whatever, I can tell you that like a lot of things, they don't get passed down the way we tell ourselves they're going to get passed down. it's a weird thing. We just can't predict like what's going to be valuable to ourselves, to the people that we're working with magically, to the people who are left over when we die. And it's kind of fascinating when we try. I don't know, like the library is another thing that's interesting to me because like that's a lot of books. And as another witch, you might sit there like from your computer and watch my video and go like, oh, that's a really valuable collection of books. That's, that represent, like, it's cool. It represents a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of time and whatever. But like my husband, for a long time owned a used bookstore. And I have personally like done a lot of purchasing of like old books, antiquarian books, used books, whatever. And books are only valuable when other people think that they're valuable and when there are markets for them. And I guarantee that there are not markets to support like a lot of what's over here. And a lot of it is going to end up like being cast off somewhere. Because even if like somebody really wants them, like from a distance, if you're not local, if you're not like in touch with whoever's selling them, if you don't have the resources, if shipping is too much, like it's just, selling books is a nightmare. Donating books is a nightmare. Like everything about books is kind of a nightmare. So like I have to collect them for myself. There's nobody out there who's going to be like, yes, I will take the whole thing. And even if there were, the logistics make it impossible. This is what I'm dealing with now. Like, with stuff, So thinking out loud about magical objects and what is important and what do we keep. And I'm getting to a place in my life where I'm just trying to be really conscious of how I allow things to circulate in my life. I'm sending off the things that I'm not using. I'm trying to rehome some things. And I'm also just like less apt to acquire things. Just as I've become conscious of how so often my predictions are wrong about what I will or won't use. So anyway, I hope you all are well. And tell me, like, what are your favorite unexpected tools? What are the things that you like maybe spent money on and then ended up hating? Or like what's your version of the thrift store candy dish? I don't know. And what are you going to do with your magical tools when you die? Where are they going to go?